forgiving. Okay, so forgiving, point number 2. We are called to forgive because we have all experienced God's forgiveness. That's why we're called to forgive, because we have experienced God's forgiveness. And our working definition for forgiving is to give up resentment of a person and cancel their debt towards you. To give up resentment, to cancel their debt towards you. Okay, so right after Jesus' instructions on if your brother sins against you, that's the title in the Bible, he goes into the parable immediately after of the unforgiving servant. So he's addressing people, he's sitting there talking to them. So he tells them about if your brother sins against you, and then he goes straight into the unforgiving servant. And this was not an accident. The story of the unforgiving servant is all about forgiveness. After confrontation, what's our next step? It's forgiveness in our relationships. So it is necessary to have confrontation and then forgiveness to keep good and healthy relationships. So I'm not going to read the whole story to you. I'm going to sum it up. But if you want to read it, it's Matthew 18:21-35. So basically, it's this great parable where Jesus is the king, and he shows great mercy to his servant by canceling his debt. But that servant turns around and he goes to somebody else and he demands that that person pay him. And he does not show mercy. He immediately turns around and doesn't show mercy to somebody else. Okay, so let's read. It's Matthew 18. I'm going to read the part that's 32-35. So here is the response. So here's basically the king's response, which we know is Jesus. He says, "You wicked servant, I forgave you that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Woo! Yeah, that's really heavy. It's really, really heavy. And that is what he chose to say right after he talks about sinning against your brother and having that confrontation. That's his next step. I don't want that to be the verse that came after. Do you guys? I want it to be something a little lighter, a little bit more like, well, hey, there's different levels. If somebody really, really hurt you, you could hold on to that one for a while. But if it was just a little bit, you probably should let that one go, but that's not what it is. It's like, hey, I forgave you. Now you turn around and you forget. I forgave you everything on the cross, all of it. So you need to turn around and forgive the people that have hurt you. And it's hard to do. It's not easy. I've been in situations where I've had to forgive, and it took me a long time. I would forgive, and then a couple, weeks later, I'd go, did I really forgive? Oh, shoot. Now I'm having those thoughts again that I'm pretty ticked off at this person. I'm not feeling the forgiveness in my heart. It is a hard process. I don't think it's an overnight process typically. Thank the Lord if it is, but a lot of times forgiveness is an ongoing process of, okay, shoot, those thoughts and those feelings came up again today. I have to again today forgive this person again today, right? And just keep moving forward, keep having obedience. And the truth is, Christ is the only one who can have our hearts forgive other people. It's not in and of ourselves. In and of ourselves, we're just going to hold on to it. We're going to backstab. We're going to gossip. Even if you don't think you're a person who would, it's in our sin nature, we would. But it's Jesus Christ in us who gives us that ability to let go and forgive and cancel a debt towards somebody who's done something to us. In this study right here, Seeking Him, Experiencing the Joy of Personal Revival, I did this years ago. There is a portion in it on forgiveness, and it's by Nancy Lee DeMoss, and she writes, when we repent of our sins, God mercifully releases us from our debt. Through the great cost of his son's death on the cross, as recipients of his forgiveness, we're called to forgive those who sin against us. When we release our offenders through forgiveness, we discover the key that unlocks the prison doors of our hearts and sets us free to experience greater joy or greater peace and joy than we ever dreamed possible. So not only is forgiveness something that is so beneficial to the other person that you're canceling their debt towards them, but also it's so important for your own heart. We can have that lack of peace in our own lives, that bitterness, that resentment that just gets stored up and you don't want it there. But if you don't have forgiveness and you haven't taken that step, that just kind of stews in there and it remains. So we want to have that peace and that joy in our own lives and be able to forgive and find our own releasement from kind of being in that prison of being upset and angry at people and having that resentment. So have you ever thought after forgiving someone, did I truly forgive them? Like, did I really? I think I did, but then now I'm feeling a little angry towards them. Somebody kind of told me about that story, remember, and now I'm feeling angry about them. So here's a good barometer test for you. Have you really forgiven somebody? And this comes out of this devotional, this book I did. So number 1, every time I think of the person or the offense, I still feel angry. If that's true, you probably haven't forgiven them fully. Number 2, I have a subtle, secret desire to see the person pay for what he or she did to me. We've all been there. Deep in my heart, I wouldn't mind if something bad happened to the person who hurt me. Yep. I sometimes find myself telling other people how this person has hurt me. Getting people on your side. If the person's name comes up, I'm more likely to say something negative about him or her than positive. Been there? I cannot thank God for the person. And I wrote in parentheses, I think this is why God asks us to pray for our enemies. And I don't know what number I was on. So the next one is isolation of the person or getting others to isolate them as well. That one was added. The other ones were all in this book, but I think that one also is true, that we can tend to isolate and want other people to isolate this person. The questionnaire, I think, is a really great tool for just where is your heart at. And I think if you find yourself like thinking right now of a relationship and you're like, oh shoot, I passed like 5 of them, but that 6th one, oh no. You know what? I wouldn't like worry so much. Did I forgive them 2 years ago when I thought I forgave them fully? Today, forgive them again. Don't worry about the past and like, was I? Today, forgive them again. You know what the truth is? That person, if you've reconciled, they might hurt you again. And you're going to have to forgive them again. You know, it's an ongoing process. I don't think we have to look so much into the past of like, did I forgive them 2 years ago or 1 year ago? Today, forgive them. And tomorrow, if a thought comes into your head that you're annoyed at them again for something they did, forgive them again tomorrow. It's an ongoing process that we need to be in. I had one of these relationships like this. I had somebody who was hurting me intentionally, I felt, and there was nothing I felt that I did wrong. It was just coming at me over a long period of time. So at this time, I felt like I had very little tools in my belt to deal with controversy. I hadn't really confronted somebody in a big way, and I think actually that relationship that I talked about previously with that girlfriend, that was after this. So this is before this. So really, it was just, I hadn't really gone through a big issue before. So instead of getting through the steps, I was uncomfortable with the idea of confronting. I'd never really done it before in a big way. So I just stewed for a very, very long time, just saving up all these things that this person said and did. And I would sit there and do the dishes, and I would think about every word they had said to me and just replay it in my head. It was like my full-time job. in my head, was replaying everything this person did and said to me. And I just developed this heart of bitterness, this major heart of bitterness. In this book, it says, bitterness robs us of our joy and peace. It hijacks us, taking us places we never wanted to go, doing things we never wanted to do, and making us people we never wanted to be. I really look back and I feel like that bitterness kind of turned me into a person that I don't want to be. I never really was that person. Then all of a sudden, when I didn't confront something I needed to, I'm turning into a resentful, bitter person, wanting to like this person that much because they hurt me. I'm starting to go down that path, And I mean, thank God that in our relationship that there was healing and restoration, confrontation, all those things. I don't want to say it was necessarily the model. It didn't always look pretty, but we're in a healed relationship now, and it's just great to see. And so I look to this relationship and I think, wow, God can really restore. He can bring back good into relationships that have gone down a really, really hard path, and He can make them right again. So next, we're going to go over reconcile. That's our next point. So point 3, God is about fixing and restoring relationship with us and between believers. Reconciling, to settle or resolve differences and be restored to friendship or harmony. Can you say or? Or harmony. Be restored to friendship or harmony. So God was reconciled to us through His death on the cross. Through Jesus' death on the cross, God was reconciled to us, right? He sent Jesus Christ onto the cross so that He could again have that relationship with us. That is His goal. That was His goal in sending Jesus. He wanted relationship with us again, that we could be restored, that we would be in heaven with Him forever. And He wants that for us, like we've talked about. He is present among us when we go through these steps. He wants that for us. So remember how I kind of talked about Matthew 5? So in Matthew 5, He gives somebody instruction. He says, if you go to the altar and you're going to sacrifice, and then you remember that somebody has something against you, so you've done something to hurt somebody else, so they have something against you, then you need to leave your gift at the altar and go. I mean, literally in the middle of sacrificing, you just be like, hey, sorry, I gotta go. I can't do this right now. Can you hold my sheep for me for just a tad? That place to put the pigeon. I need to go make something right, and then I'm gonna come back. And I was joking that in some of my relationships that little lamb would have turned into a full-grown sheep by the time I got back. Because, some relationships just took a long time to heal, or those, resolve things. It wasn't overnight. But reconciliation is really dependent on both people. Romans 12:18 says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So let's be honest, it's not always possible because there's two people involved. But as believers, I think we're called to be reconciling, to be coming to a person and saying, we both need to forgive each other, right? We both have to. I think typically, that somebody hasn't done 100% of the issue. Like typically, right? Isn't it that we've done a little, they've done a little, especially when we see like people getting divorced, they've done a little, you've done a little. We live in relationship with each other, right? We're not perfect. I've hurt you, you've hurt me. That's just relationships. And so you need to own if in a relationship it's 100% and somebody did 75% of the hurting and you did 25, you got to own your 25. You got to come to them and say, hey, here's where I went wrong. Here's my 25%, even if they were 75% at fault. That is what I think can often bring that reconciliation. If you say, here's what I've done. Well, I really didn't feel like I had done anything to hurt that person or to be to deserve what they gave me. But in the end, because I didn't confront it, I had 25% or more in that, because I was bitter. I was getting angry, so I had my 25% to confess. Like, hey, here's what I did wrong. So have you ever thought, gosh, I would really like to reconcile with somebody, but I just don't know if we can have the relationship back to where it was. Like through this, oh, look at that, guys. I just pulled that off. Okay. So through this, I feel like I kind of figured out some things about this person, or I'd like to have reconciliation, but I don't know if I want to like jump right back into relationship exactly where it was at. So my mom went to the Catalyst conference this year. I think it's up in Irvine, and it's like the Andy Stanley North Point Ministries conference. And do you guys know T.D. Jakes? So his daughter is a pastor. Her name is Sarah Jakes Roberts. She pastors a church, and she spoke at this and had a really interesting word picture for us about relationships that I think maybe could bring some of this together. So what she said is like, think of your house as relationships. So you have some people who are in your master bedroom, in the most intimate part of your life. You share everything with them. Hopefully this would be your husband. You share everything with them. Maybe your best friend, your close friends. You share everything with them. They know your heart. They know what your kids are going through. They know what your marriage is going through. They're just with you in it. Then you've got some people in the living room. So they're the people that, maybe you do life with. Maybe you're in a home group with them even. You share, the home group people could also be in your bedroom, but you share life with them. You do things with them. They're with you. Your kids play sports together. They come over to your house for dinner. But, they're not in your bedroom necessarily. You haven't shared your whole life with them. They're not the people that you necessarily go to with your deepest hurts and pains. Then you have people who are on the porch. Those are the people that maybe you've tried to do a relationship with, but it just isn't clicking. So they're not inside your house. They're out on the porch, and that's okay, right? You know the people who are on your porch. You're like, I just for some reason can't have a full, complete relationship with you, but I love you, I care about you, but you're on my porch. And then there are the people that we tried to restore the relationship, but it didn't work. When you reconcile, it's them and it's you. So if they weren't willing to reconcile, then those are the people we call that are out on the sidewalk. You tried to make the relationship right, but it never came back together. That person's on the sidewalk. Maybe we can't really be in relationship. Those could be unsafe people in your life that you shouldn't really have restored relationship with again. And I think that you can forgive people in your own heart and not necessarily get back into relationship with them if they're unsafe for you. So what I'm talking about in this message is your regular conflict in relationships. I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm not talking about verbal, physical, emotional abuse in like those kind of trauma situations. Those people would definitely be out on the sidewalk. But what I'm talking about is kind of your run-of-the-mill, like, hey, we're in each other's lives. So yeah, maybe we've hurt each other deeply, but still, it's your normal, typical relationship. And in this analogy of the bedroom, I think what's most important and what she said is that you can love and serve all of these people well. You can love and serve the people in your bedroom, the people in your living room, and the people on your porch. You can love and serve them well. You can bring them meals, right? The person on your porch, you could still bring them and drop off a meal. You can still ask them how you're doing, even if you're not sure deepest feelings and thoughts with them and prayer requests. We can still do church and do Christian life and fellowship really well by loving these people. And I think the truth is, the analogy is so funny because we all kind of know, right? Who's in your bedroom, who's in your living room, and who's on your porch. right? It's like we kind of know. It's just we've had things in relationships, but we can serve and love all of them. You can have the fruits of the Spirit for all those people: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's what we're called to. Not everybody has to be in your bedroom. We were laughing on Monday night because we're like, no, we do not want everybody in our bedroom. You know, but it's so true that we can have good relationships with all these people. We can be examples of love and servanthood. And I believe that when we know that, and when we have somebody on the porch and we're loving them well, that can be a very peace-filled relationship. But if you tried to bring them to your bedroom, it probably wouldn't be very peace-filled. You would immediately be like, oh my goodness, I just shared this with them and it didn't go well, and they shared it with somebody else, or this happened or that. And the relationship is just like this. But if you keep them on the porch and you love them well on the porch, honestly, I think we've done our job as Christians. We've done our job well. We've given glory and honor to God. So for the person on the sidewalk, maybe, the person that still doesn't want relationship or contact with them, or I guess the sidewalk I said were maybe the really big ones, so maybe the porch. Let's call them the porch people. So your porch people. If getting back into a restorative relationship hasn't worked, I would just let that person go for a while. That would be my advice. Let that person go and try again. We always have a goal of restoration and reconciliation. And maybe some of you are in relationships right now that are good and healthy with somebody you never thought you could reconcile with, that God has done something amazing in those relationships. So sometimes I think just time and separation, and if they're not ready to restore, but you could go back later and try to seek that restoration, give them their space, and then go back and try again. And if it just keeps not working, maybe there would be a time that you would say, okay, it just didn't work and I really tried. But we always have that goal. We always have that goal of reconciliation and restoration in our heads. And lastly, we have peace. So that we would go to our place in peace. Achieving relational peace can be a hard but fruitful process for believers, for their own sake, the sake of the church, and for the sake of the unbelieving world watching the way Christians love one another. So peace is the state of security and harmony in personal relationships. That state of peace. So really, I think we see this model of confrontation, reconciliation, forgiveness in Jesus, right? And in God. Really in God and in Jesus. So what prophets? He sent Jesus. He sent John the Baptist. All of them telling us, hey, your sin is hurting you. You need to repent and give up your sin. He confronted us in it, right? God confronts us in our sin. Hey, this isn't good for you. This isn't what I have planned for you. I want more for you than this. I don't want you in your sin. So then he sent Jesus to be that perfect forgiveness for us, to bring us into that reconciled relationship with him. We see those 3 steps in Jesus and in God and what they did for us. We see those steps. We had an interesting question on Monday night. Somebody asked, do we always have to have all 3 steps? And I had to think for a second. I didn't want to answer too quickly because I was like, oh gosh, I need to think about that. Do we always in our relationships with controversy need to have all 3 steps? And I think the answer is no. We don't. We don't always have to have all 3 steps. There are relationships that are abusive. There are relationships that are just unhealthy, unsafe relationships for people to be in. And I think that sometimes we're not going to have all 3 steps every single time. But the goal is to have all 3 steps. That's the goal. This is guidelines and principles for how to do controversy and conflict well in our relationships. But yes, there are going to be times when there are things outside this scope. And there's so many different examples, and you guys are all going through different things and have gone through different things. that I don't think there's one blanket answer. I'm not trying to say that if you don't do this, somehow you're not right with God, and if this wasn't complete, all three of these steps in every relationship and every controversy in the past you've been through. Because like we said, sometimes I think you just have to forgive them in your heart, but you're not going to have that reconcile with them because they're not a safe person to do those steps with. But in our good and relationships, I think that we need to practice these steps. We don't want to give up on our relationships too easy, right? The ones we put effort into, we don't want to give up on them. There's gonna come a point, and I just assume that you're gonna come into conflict in your relationships. And if you can learn how to work through it well, sometimes your relationship is better on the other side, right? Sometimes it can be a more full and healthy relationship once you've kind of worked through and seen each other work through these things and seen that, hey, you're still committed to me and I'm still committed to you. And I want this relationship. And sometimes that can actually be a really sweet thing, that it brings you closer. So I think that this is beneficial for our own sake. It's beneficial for the sake of the church, the way that our church is working and doing ministry together. We do this women's ministry. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people bumping shoulders, and you take this and I'll take this, and let's serve in this way and let's do this. And we got to work together as a team, and there's at times going to be that conflict. But if we can do this well, hopefully we'd only get to the level where you say, I'm going to go talk to you alone, and let's work on this, me and you alone. This hurt me. This wasn't right. I didn't like this. Let's just work on it together. And then we never have to make all those extra steps of getting it to high level anything. Other people don't even need to know about it. We just need to do it between me and you, and we'll get it done with, and we can go on. And then also, I think it's important for the unbelieving world that's watching. They watch, that God said that they would know by the love that we have for one another, that's how they would know that we are true followers of him and children of his, that we would know. And this is a huge area where we're being an example to other people of how we're doing conflict, how we're working through some of these things and showing that, hey, we have the steps to make these things right, to love each other and love each other well. So that was my talk today, and I think that there's a lot to talk about. We'll go over the homework in our groups, and maybe we can also, you guys in your groups can have a little bit of time to maybe discuss some of what I talked about, because I know that it was different from what we went through in the homework, so maybe this is making you think a little. And if you have any questions, you can come to me after the whole study is done, because we'll break off into our groups, or you could talk to your leader and ask them any questions that this may have jogged, because I know this is a big one for all of us. We're all going through things that are hard. So, okay, you guys, thanks so much for having me.